Questo pomeriggio iniziamo questa sessione, proprio un'altra di queste lezioni. È mio piacere anche introdurre il professor Oded Lipschits dell'Università di Tel Aviv. Il professor Lipschits è appunto professore dell'archeologia della terra di Israele nei periodi biblici. Ha fatto i suoi studi appunto anche di storia dell'ebraismo sotto la direzione del professor Nadav Naaman. È stato per molti anni, fino a qualche anno fa, direttore dell'Istituto di Archeologia presso l'Università di Tel Aviv e ha anche fondato il programma di Masters dell'antico Israele anche per studenti internazionali. Tra vari scavi in cui è stato coinvolto, forse i due progetti maggiori sono stato lo scavo di Ramat Rachel, che sicuramente lo menzionerà, tra il 2005 e il 2010, e dal 2012 fino ad oggi direttore dello scavo di Tel Azekah, di Tel Zaccaria, appunto progetto tra l'altro dove ci conosciamo da diversi anni a causa di quello. Non menzionerò tutta la bibliografia sua, ma sicuramente sottolineo qualche libro e qualche pubblicazione. Ovviamente attualmente anche in completamento le varie pubblicazioni dello scavo, no? Le relazioni di scavo di Ramat Rachel, ovviamente editi con altri e tutta l'equipe di scavo, ma due libri recenti suoi. Uno è Age of Empires, pubblicato nel 2021, che proprio tratta di tutto l'aspetto amministrativo dall'VIII al II secolo, specialmente alla luce appunto delle anse, no? Dei sigilli sulle anse. Un altro libro appena edito quest'anno scorso, che mette insieme tutta una serie di articoli suoi, è Giuda and the Biblical Period, pubblicato da De Gruyter. Un libro che è appena uscito, però in ebraico al momento, sicuramente in cantiere, traduzioni in varie lingue, tra cui inglese e spagnolo, su The Untold Story of the Kingdom of Giuda, che tra l'altro è anche una serie di podcast che Oded mi dice che sono anche in inglese. Tante altre pubblicazioni, alcune le abbiamo già viste, come From Nomadism to Monarchy, che è stato uno dei redattori appunto di quel libro, così come tanti altri. Ma lascio subito la parola al professor Lipschits, che oggi ci parlerà di Giuda under the Assyrian, Babylonian and Persian Empires, New Insights from Archaeology on the Age of Empires. Bene, parola al professor Lipschits, che parlerà in inglese.
Very happy to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's a great honor. My second time here, so I'm very happy. The aim of this lecture is to emphasize, and I'm saying it from the beginning so you will understand where I'm aiming to, is to demonstrate that the Bible was written and edited, and Judaism was crystallized in the long period when Judah was under the rule of the empires. And I think that we must take into consideration, when we read the Bible, the period and the geopolitical situation when it was formed. So I'm saying it from the beginning, and then we'll come back to it at the end. Well, Judah became an Assyrian vassal kingdom in 732 BCE, in the early days of King Ahaz. It was one of only few small kingdoms that survived the Assyrian conquest of the Levant by accepting Assyrian rule and turning its status from an independent kingdom to a vassal kingdom. Like any other state in the peripheral regions of the empire who submitted to Assyrian demands, the ruling elite and the royal family were allowed to remain in power and maintain autonomous status. However, the Assyrians imposed vassal obligations over Judah, like paying tribute not only in material goods but also in labor, sending reports and information concerning the political and military matters in the area, taking part in Assyrian military campaigns, sending supply to Assyrian army during these campaigns, and so on. These obligations were monitored by an Assyrian official. In this lecture, I will examine the influence of the Assyrian rule over the kingship, the administration, and the economy of Judah, and will demonstrate the different changes that occurred in this very small and peripheral kingdom in the 100 years between 732, the time of King Ahaz, and 630, the time of King Josiah, when the Assyrian Empire withdrew from its holdings across the Euphrates. I will emphasize the gap between the dramatic changes in economy, administration, kingship, and the built area around Jerusalem, and between the total silence on all that in the biblical historiography, reflecting on the one hand on the problematic nature of the biblical descriptions as historical source, and on the other hand, on the importance of the archaeological research as an independent source for our understanding of the history of Judah during the First Temple period. But I would like to start with a general statement that will set the period of time I'm going to focus about in the general chronology of the biblical period, both with the First and Second Temple periods in Judah. In most studies, the history of Judah and the Judeans in the first millennium BCE is described according to two main periods. The First Temple period, when Judah was a kingdom with its capital and temple in Jerusalem and with Davidic royal house in its head, and the early Second Temple period, when Judah was a province under the rule of the Persian, Ptolemaic, and Seleucid empires, with its temple in Jerusalem, but with no independent kings and with no royal house in Jerusalem until the revolt of the Maccabees and the establishment of the Hasmonean kingdom in the middle of the next 2nd century BCE. This description of the First and Second Temple periods, with a period of a gap, a small gap in the middle, what I call the Babylonian gap, the time of the exile, between them, is right from many aspects, especially when dealing with the history of Jerusalem and the history of the Davidic line, the royal house of Judah for the 400 years of the First Temple period. It is clear that it was the political, religious, and economical interest of the Judean elite, the people who were exiled from Jerusalem and became the Judean Gola, exilic time, and its representative who came back to Judah in the early Persian period to describe the history of Judah and the Judeans in this way in order to establish and emphasize their status and rule over the land as against other claims and other historical perspectives embedded even in the biblical text, who claimed for their continued presence in the land without an exilic break and with no right of the Judean exiled community in Babylon over the land of Judah and Jerusalem in its center. As against this historical and political perception, from the administrative and economic perspectives, as well as from the material culture point of view, it is better to describe the history of Judah and the Judeans in a totally different way, as built from three different periods. The formative period of the establishment of the kingdom from the time of David, until the middle of the second half of the 8th century BCE, the time that Christian talked about this morning. At the end of this period, Judah was already well-established kingdom. Its borders are marked with a line of cities and fortresses that were along the western side of the lowland, from Bet Shemesh in the north to Lachish in the south, as well as along the Beersheba Arad valleys in the south. The capital, Jerusalem, was expanded from the narrow limits of the city of David to the southwestern hill, and its size was 5 times bigger in the time of David, even if not all the areas was settled and densely populated. The Davidic dynasty was well established after 200 years of rule over the kingdom, and the temple of Jerusalem was already well established as the king's temple and the main and the central one in the kingdom. Archaeology can testify that the economy and administration developed under the Davidic leadership, especially in Jerusalem. The bullae discovered in Jerusalem indicate words a well-developed script and scribal tradition. The many fish bones discovered in Jerusalem, a clear indication for a long-distance trade, and the administrative center in Lachish may indicate the tight control of Jerusalem over the borders of the population that used to live in Judean territories, especially in Jerusalem, but also in the other administrative centers. A well-established elite layer existed, operating this administrative and economic system under direct control and rule of the Davidic dynasty from Jerusalem. Many scholars, however, stressed the tribal, non-centralized, and local characteristics of the society and economy in Judah during this period, and described Judah as a developing state. It's a kind of declaration. It's still a developing state and not a developed state, still very non-centralized. The second period in the history of Judah started when Judah lost its independent status and became a vassal Assyrian kingdom in the last third of the 8th century BCE. And this is why I started with King Ahaz, that became a vassal king in 732 BCE. In a sharp process, Judah had to change its economy and administration and to become part of the Assyrian Empire that imposed a centralized authority on a very non-centralized kingdom. The status of Judah was changed from an independent to a vassal kingdom, and this status remained for 100 years with a short break during the revolt of Hezekiah and until the early years of King Josiah, when Assyria withdrew from its positions in the areas to the west of the Euphrates and collapsed in a quick historical process. But soon after came the Egyptian Empire, and Judah became a vassal Egyptian kingdom when King Josiah, that started his rule as Assyrian vassal, continued for some years as an independent king, and then became an Egyptian vassal king, and he ended his life in Megiddo and was killed by Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, and you can read about it in 2nd Book of Kings, chapter 23. The Egyptians were replaced by the Babylonians, and the last kings of Judah were all vassal Babylonian kings. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 586 and the deportation of the house of David to Babylon ended the history of Jerusalem as a capital of the Davidic dynasty and brought to a temporary break in the history of the temple. It caused also to a demographic crisis, to the destruction of the main urban centers, and changed the settlement pattern in Judah towards a more rural settlement, something that continued to characterize Judah until the Hasmonean period. For 400 years, nothing was changed in this settlement and demography of Judah until the 2nd century BCE. But from many other aspects, the 586 catastrophic events didn't mark a change. The material culture remained the same north and south of Jerusalem. The same pottery continued to be produced, the same rural settlement continued to exist, and to produce the same agricultural products with the same population that continued to live in the land and was not deported to Babylon. The same pattern continues to characterize Judah in the Persian period, in the time of the return. Even if the cult in Jerusalem was renewed and a new temple was built in Jerusalem, nothing was changed also after the fall of the Persian Empire to the hands of Alexander the Great and during the Ptolemaic and early Seleucid period. Jerusalem didn't establish its status and didn't become an urban center until the establishment of the Hasmonean kingdom in the second half of the 2nd century BCE. The third stage in the history of Judah and the Judeans started in the days of the Maccabees and with the renewed establishment of the Judean kingdom and the Judean independence after 600 years. This is a period were not only that Jerusalem became again the main urban and demographic center of the land, but all the characteristics of the material culture that developed when Judah was a vassal kingdom and a province under the rule of the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persian, and Ptolemaic empires were drastically changed, and in a very sharp and short process. This is why in a few minutes I will show you what was changed when Judah became an Assyrian vassal in 732. Because from now on, from 732, that everything was changed, we have a continuation of 600 years of the same material culture, the same rural settlement, the same demography. Judah was very small, 30, 40,000 people, that's it. With the same border, nothing was changed for 600 years. I should also emphasize that according to this perception of the history of Judah in the first and second temple periods, the first period lasted about 200 years, from the mid-10th century, David and Solomon, to the mid-8th century BCE, the time that Christian spoke about it this morning. Also, the third period lasted about the same time, from the establishment of the Hasmonean kingdom in the mid-2nd century BCE until the Roman destruction. By the way, Judah was independent in this period only for 70 years, until Romans started to rule over there. So 200 years, but it's not really 200 years of independence. And in 70 AD, Judah was destroyed. The second part, the Age of Empires, this is the period that might be called, the main time of Judah and the Judeans, the time when the Bible was written, the time when Judaism was established. It was a time when Judah was a vassal kingdom and a province under the rule of the huge empire, and this period lasted 600 years. So this is the main period in the first and second temple period. And it was the longest and the most influential in Judean history and historiography. It is the period when most of the Bible was written and edited, when the main feature of Judaism were shaped, and when the cult and theology of Judaism were created. The conclusion is that, and now I can start my lecture, if you understand what I'm saying here, the most important formative and influential change in the administration and economy of Judah, with the clearest and far-reaching change in the material culture, a change that was a starting point for the characteristics of the material culture in Judah during this coming 600 years, was the beginning of this age of empires, the period when Judah became a vassal Assyrian kingdom. What do we know about the meaning of this change in the status of Judah from the Assyrian perspective? Since there are many sources concerning the system of the Assyrian rule in vassal kingdoms and provinces, many studies have reconstructed the system of government that Assyria adopted in different regions, as well as the Assyrian administrative system, some with special attention to the area of Israel and the Levant. From these studies, it is clear that the Assyrian policy of imperial expansion was carried out with great proficiency, in that it took into account the special circumstances of each region. The decision concerning the direction of the imperial expansion, in addition to the nature of Assyrian rule in each of the regions it reached, were examined in light of considerations of cost versus profit. The system of the Assyrian governments that allowed maximum utilization of the imperial expansion was direct rule, expressed through the establishment of provinces annexed to Assyria. The process of annexation of an area to Assyria, its conversion into province, and its integration into the Assyrian imperial system included three principal stages, each of which can be identified in the archaeological records. So we don't need the inscription, but we also have the inscription. The first stage was the use of military force in an attempt to neutralize local resistance and to exhibit the strength of the Assyrian rule through fear. The second stage included building operations and the foundation of administrative centers and forts that were used as the power centers and the central Assyrian administration for the management of the province. The building projects were not limited to the city centers and included the foundation of fortresses and roadside stations, whose purpose was to integrate vast territories within the Assyrian system of knowledge, transmission, and economy. The third stage included deportation and resettlement, which was meant to weaken the conquered kingdoms, securing the Assyrian rule through the breaking down of the local resistance, and for economic purposes, to maximize the agricultural exploitation of the region annexed to the empire on the one hand, and to create population groups that were continent upon imperial authority on the other. In the peripheral regions of the empire, in which it was more profitable for the Assyrians not to destroy existing political entities like Ammon, Edom, Moab, and Judah, they were satisfied with the achievement of hegemony, the implication of which was forcing vassal loyalties on these small kingdoms. The consolidation of Assyrian hegemony through the subordination of kingdoms yielded political, military, and economic benefits by means of little investment. These steps taken by the Assyrians are harder to identify using archaeological tools. The coercion of loyalty to Assyria was carried out by using military force, and in situations of lack of loyalty, such as rebellions of the local kingdom, the Assyrians didn't hesitate to switch the current ruling dynasties with new ones appointed by them. The Assyrian hegemony was protected by means of an Assyrian official placed in the vassal kingdom, at whose dispense stood a garrison force established through asymmetrical peace treaties. In these, the local ruler committed to complete loyalty to Assyria, and in return, the Assyrian Empire committed to providing, securing, and protection. And as I'll show you in a minute, we excavated these Assyrian centers in the small kingdom that survived. The vassal kings were obliged to send regular intelligence reports on the movement of Assyrian enemies, pay annual taxes to the Assyrian throne, and participate in Assyrian campaigns. As for the Assyrians, they enjoyed absolute military freedom within the vassal kingdoms and were free to take advantage of the natural and human resources. Accordingly, the vassal treaties were the most economically efficient way to spread the Assyrian imperial rule. However, the imperial rule became an economic burden on the local political units, making it necessary for the empire to convince them of their cost effectiveness. Therefore, the Assyrian hegemony relied upon threats of use of force and the prestige of the empire. Like any other state in the peripheral regions of the empire who submitted to Assyrian demands, the ruling elite and the royal family in Jerusalem were allowed to remain in power and maintain autonomous status. However, the Assyrians imposed vassal obligations over Judah, like paying tribute, not only in material goods but also in labor, sending reports and information concerning the political and military matters in the area, taking part in Assyrian army during these campaigns, and so on and so forth. These obligations were monitored by an Assyrian official, Kepu, who was seated in Ramat Rachel, and I'll talk about it in a minute. It should be clear that during this period, as well as during the next hundreds of years, the administration and economy of Judah, as well as its culture, were deeply affected by the dominated empires. Now, Judah became an Assyrian vassal kingdom in a clear date and with a clear historical connection. Tiglath-Pileser III led an unprecedented campaign of the conquests, and within a few years had reshaped the geopolitical arena in accordance with the economic, military, and strategic interests of Assyria. After Tiglath-Pileser III's conquest of northern Syria, an anti-Assyrian alliance formed in the southern Levant, headed by Aram Damascus, along with the Kingdom of Israel, and with the participation of Tyre, the Philistine kingdoms, and the Arabian tribes, an alliance that perhaps enjoyed Egyptian support. King Ahaz, who had just come to the power in Judah in 734 BCE, was attacked by the kings of Israel and Aram Damascus for his refusal to join the anti-Assyrian alliance. And according to the second book of Kings, chapter 16, verses 7 and 8, Ahaz didn't capitulate. He voluntarily surrendered to Assyria. In retrospect, this appears to have been a sound policy. The bitter fates suffered by other kingdoms only highlighting the danger Judah faced. With the support of the prophet Isaiah, Ahaz stood his ground against these who favored joining the anti-Assyrian alliance. This policy, deeply rooted in Judahite history, suggests that the kings of Judah were aware of the kingdom's frailty and preferred a policy of voluntary submission over the military campaign that might destroy the kingdom. Thus, until the days of Hezekiah, Judah remained loyal to the Assyrian Empire, paying annual tribute and refraining from joining the frequent rebellions against Assyria. In a summary inscription, Tiglath-Pileser III mentioned Ahaz, whom he calls Yehoachaz of the land of Judah, as one of the kings who paid him tribute. In an inscription written around 717 BCE, Sargon is termed the subduer of the land of Judah, which lies far away. And again, among the kingdoms who paid tribute in 713 BC. So, Judah became an Assyrian vassal kingdom in the early years of King Ahaz, and this had a tremendous impact on all aspects of the administration and economy in the small kingdom, as the Assyrians demanded full control over all production in the kingdom in order to know how much taxes they could collect. It is true that unlike the rich coastal kingdoms in Philistia and Phoenicia that were based on maritime trade, the economy in Judah was based on agricultural production, mainly liquids such as olive oil and wine. But these taxes were also important to the Assyrians. The tremendous change in Judah's material wealth, administration, and economy has been recognized by many scholars, but strangely enough, no one has linked these changes to the presence of the empire in Judah and its demand for unification and control of the scale of production. It seems to me that, to a large extent, archaeologists and historians follow the biblical writer who, from the Jerusalem ideology that was written in the days of King Josiah, after the withdrawal of Assyria from the region, denied the 100 years of slavery to Assyria, downplayed its significance, and mentioned it only when there was no choice, in the days of Ahaz and the rebellion of Hezekiah that brought to the military campaign of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, in 701 BCE. But the tremendous changes in all areas of life in Judah cannot be denied, and the most appropriate explanation for this is the presence of the Assyrians in Judah. Presence that started the age of empires. It is a fact that all the changes that appeared suddenly with Judah's enslavement to Assyria continue to exist throughout the 600 years that Judah was under the rule of foreign empires. So, what it is all about? I will give you the main example so you will understand the way I'm trying to build it. At the end of the 8th century BCE, a significant change occurred in all aspects of the ceramic culture of Giuda, which evolved from an unstandardized small-scale production in local workshops to a standardized mass industry with a broad range of distribution and a limited variety of shapes, and the use of larger storage jars than had previously been used. It is a clear sign of centralized royal economy, which improved agricultural production and its mobility under the guidance of central authority. The best example to this change can be found in the study of the local production of storage jars and the change in its production in the late 8th century BC. I will just explain. This is the most crucial container that exists in every land, Greece, Cyprus, Giuda, that producing liquids. They have to take the liquids from the production places to the central places and then commerce to have it. But until the late 8th century, until the appearance of the Assyrians in Giuda, we have many different production centers of these jars. We have no unification in the size of the jars. So we have jars of 30 liters, 25 liters, 45 liters, and you cannot see any unification. So when the Assyrians are coming and say, how can we know how much you produce? So then the change is coming. The typical oval storage jar in Giuda, known as the Lamelech jars or the royal Judahite jar, is well-known find. New study of these jars, including computer-generated typology of large sample of these oval storage jars, demonstrated that there are three main chronological stages in the development and use of the oval jars that were produced in the Shfela. In the first stage, dated to the late 9th and the early 8th century BCE, the oval storage jars were characterized mainly by the manufacturing of non-standardized subtypes. So many different subtypes. In Bet Shemesh and the Sorek Valley, they have subtype. In the Azekah, they have subtype. In Lachish, subtype. So each one produces its own jar with no unification. These jars appear mainly in the lowland, also in large numbers in sites that were not included inside the borders of Giuda, like Teletzafi, god of the Philistines, and, for example, in Gezer, that is belonging to the kingdom of Israel. In the second stage, dated to the middle of the 8th century BCE, when Achaz became a vassal to the Assyrians, a standardized jar became more common than the non-standardized jar. So they have one porter production that is in the Elah Valley, probably in Soho, near Tel Azekah, that was chosen by the local king, and from now on he is the producer of the official jar that is appear in all over Giuda. And this jar must be in one size. So it's not this really one size, but it's nearly one size. All the jars look the same. You cannot see any difference. And all of them are between 35 and 42 liters. And the difference is how thick is the jar itself, because outside it looks the same. In the third stage, dated to the late 8th and later, one type of the jars was adopted for use by the royal administrative system of Giuda, as can be demonstrated by the appearance of stamp impression on handles of jars from this type. The gradual standardization of the jars in the mid-8th century BCE indicates a more centralized production and consumption that should be associated with the consolidation of the Judahite political, economical, and administrative system. However, the next phase in the history of these jars during the late 8th and during the later period is its adoption into the royal administrative system, which expanded the distribution and brought them to all the different geographic regions of the kingdom of Giuda. All jars continued to be manufactured in the same place, and this one main production center became integrated into the royal administrative system, connected with the stamped jar handles, which dictated their main function until the destruction of Giuda in the early 6th century BCE by the Babylonians. Under Assyrian rule, the Judahite tradition of stamping or incising jar handles began with the early Lamelech jars. These are the early Lamelech jars at the end of the 8th, early 7th century. And then it was followed by the late Lamelech stamp Persian in the early 7th century. The incised circles in the time of King Manasseh in the middle of the 7th century, and the rosette stamp impressions at the end of the 7th century. This is the time of Josiah, and until the destruction in the time of Zedekiah in the early 6th century BCE, already under Babylonian rule. The continuity of the manufacturing of royal store jars and the use of royal emblem stamped on their handles indicate that the different stamps are all part of the same administrative system that probably had the same function for about 140 years, from 732, the time of Ahaz, and until the early 6th century and the destruction of Judah by the Babylonian in 586. However, the same administrative system continued after the 586 BCE Babylonian destruction for an additional of 450 years during the Babylonian period and later. It means that the empire, they don't care if there is a king in Jerusalem or not, if there is a temple in Jerusalem or not. They want money. And the money can be paid only by collecting these agricultural liquids and paying the taxes through them. So, in the Babylonian time, we have these stamp impression with lions. And then, during the Persian and early Hellenistic period, we have the early and middle Yehud stamp impression. Pay attention that from the Persian period, from the time of the return, we don't have any more symbols. No more pictures, only script. Yehud, the name of the province, in some cases also with the name of the governor, who is the governor of the province. And until the late Hellenistic period, and when we have the Yerushalayim stamp impression in the time, just in the time of John Hyrcanus, before the establishment or during the establishment of the Hasmonean kingdom. Throughout these 600 years, Judah and then Yehud and then Judea was a land under direct rule of great empires. The stamped jar handles should be understood as part of the administrative system that had already been established when Judah became an Assyrian vassal kingdom and continued in use as long as Judah was a vassal kingdom and continued to be used later when it became a province. So we can have the time of the Assyrian, then the time of the Babylonian, and then the time of the Persian, and then later and later. More changes occurred in Judah's economy and administration when it became an Assyrian vassal kingdom. And again, all these things continued in the Babylonian, Persian, Ptolemaic, and until the Seleucid period, when we have agricultural and royal estates, together with a dramatic increase in the number of farms, small villages, and agricultural installations around Jerusalem. These developments can be explained as resulting from the demand for more agricultural products, and can also explain technological changes in the agricultural production installations that occurred in Judah at the end of the 8th century BCE. So the Assyrians want more taxes. We need to produce more in order to pay them taxes and have some liquids for ourselves. So we must have more. These developments can be explained as a result from the demand for more agricultural products and can also explain technological changes. And this is, again, the Assyrian pressure. These developments should be explained also the appearance of the shekel weight system. And again, it's the first time that we have a kind of a monetary system in Judah. So the first time that we have a kind of a fixed system. And according to this approach, this is all becoming as part of the presence of the empire in Judah. All this should connect it to Ramat Rachel, that was initially founded as a Judean administrative center under the supervision and guidance of the imperial rule. And also Ramat Rachel was built in the same time that we have unification in the production of the jars, in the same time that stamp impression appeared, in the same time that we have weights, in the same time when Assyrian appeared in Judah and Judah became a vassal kingdom. The big picture, the interpretation of the finds, leading us to the understanding of the place of Ramat Rachel as the center of Judahite administration under Assyrian, Babylonian, and Persian, and then Ptolemaic, and then Seleucid rule. And the big picture of Ramat Rachel can be indicated towards its role as the center of the imperial rule under the Assyrians, under the Babylonians, under the Persian, then under the Ptolemaic and later. The ancient tell of Ramat Rachel is located on a prominent summit, 818 meters above sea level, exactly halfway between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. It is one of the highest peaks in the area south of Jerusalem, an ideal location for a fortress and a watchtower in direct control of the road which leads to Jerusalem from the south, from Bethlehem, Hebron, and then Bethlehem, as well as the road leading to Jerusalem from the west, from Shemesh, through the Rephaim Valley. This location offers a superb view to the north, to the south, to the west, to the east. So Ramat Rachel is really controlling the entrance to Jerusalem and has a complete control over the valley of below Jerusalem, what we think is the valley of the king that was so important from the agricultural perspective south of Jerusalem. The site location of prominent peak above the Rephaim catchment not only gives it commanding view, but also turns its construction into a projecting landmark that is visible all across the Jerusalem landscape. Interestingly, Ramat Rachel could not be seen from the city of David itself, and visual contact between the two centers was blocked by the ridge of the High Commissioner's residence. Armon HaNatziv, we'll talk about this site in a minute, which controlled the city of David and the Temple Mount from the south. The first excavations at the site of Ramat Rachel were conducted in 1930 by Benjamin Meisler and Stekelis, and you can see here the first president of Israel, then he was not a president, Chaim Weizmann, coming to visit the excavation. And then between 1954 and 1962, Yochanan Haroni, the first head of the Institute of Archaeology in Tel Aviv University, he conducted 5 seasons of excavation and exposed remains of structures from different periods and belonging to 7 stratigraphical phases. He thought that this is the palace of the Judean kings. And you can see here the second president, Yitzhak Ben Zvi, visiting his excavations. The renewed expedition that I led together with Manfred Umming in the picture here, together with the 9th president of Israel visiting us in the excavation, started in 2004 and together with Tel Aviv Heidelberg project. And after a preliminary underground survey in 2004, 6 extensive excavation seasons were conducted at the site. You see here from 2005 to 2010, and each season had its own color, as you can see. With the assistance of students, hundreds of students and volunteers from around the world, large areas of the site and its surrounding were excavated, and in addition, a comprehensive survey of underground spaces, a survey of agricultural installations in the immediate vicinity, and a comprehensive study of the agricultural terraces on the slopes of the mounds were carried out. The chronological and stratigraphic picture exposed by the excavation of the renewed expedition at Ramat Rachel includes 9 separate phases of construction and development and additional phases of destruction and desolation. For us, it's very important to point on the first phase, the early building phase at Ramat Rachel, that should be dated to the late 8th century, to the time of Achaz and Hezekiah, when the Western Tower is the main architectural feature that was built there in a classic Judean way. And this structure probably functioned in building phase 1 as a tower fortress situated at the top of the hill for all to see, controlling the main roads leading to Jerusalem. But to the east of this tower, some other structures from the early phase were built, but they were later integrated in the complex of buildings that compose the edifice. And the second building phase from the Babylonian and then from the Egyptian for the Persian period. And the profusion of pottery that we have here, so you can see how the first phase was covered by the second phase of the floor that we have these. And these finds came together with a lot of private stamp impression, Lamelech stamp impression, so it's very well dated. The architectural features from this phase are unique to Ramat Rachel, indicating that already in this early phase, the site served as an administrative and governmental center with no other parallel in Judah. The many volute capitals, the so-called proto-Aeolic capital, huge capital of 400 kilos, first time ever appears in Judah, located in the entrances and doors of the edifice, as well as a series of small carved stone columns with tiny palmette capitals that had been part of the window balustrades, similar to those that appear in the reliefs known as the woman in the window, should all be assigned to the same architectural ensemble. So you see that we know about these windows from the ivories, but in Ramat Rachel we actually find it, these window balustrades. Even at this early stage, the edifice at Ramat Rachel was unparalleled by any other in the kingdom of Judah. It included a fortress tower in the west and several ashlar stone buildings with ornamental volute capitals, small stone columns, and decorated a window or windows and other ornaments that were there. The profusion of stamp impression on jar, Ramat Rachel is the capital in the world with the amount of jars and stamped jars handles. So thousands of them. No other site in Israel in the world have so many jars and stamped jars. And it means that it was the administrative center for the collection of agricultural products, probably paid as taxes to the Assyrian Empire. This administrative role would grow in importance in the subsequent stages of its existence under the Babylonian and Persian and Ptolemaic rule. What is the source of the plan and architectural items of this edifice? Where it comes from? It's not Judean. There are no parallels to these finds in Judah, beside one volute capital that was found in Jerusalem, in an unclear stratigraphic location. And it is unclear today that the source of this architectural element is in the 9th century Omride dynasty kingdom in Israel. But there are at least 2 more sites, very similar in date and probably also plan and function to Ramat Rachel, both with similar volute capitals. And I just want to mention it because we went to visit this site and we learned about this site, and we can see that Ramat Rachel is not unique in the vassal kingdoms that became under Assyrian rule in the same time of the late 8th century. 5 volute capitals from Khirbet al-Mudaibi, about 21 kilometers southeast of Karak, the capital of Moab, where the main characteristic of the 5 volutes capitals discovered at Khirbet Mudaibi are very similar to those at Ramat Rachel, a clear indication that the stone cutters chiseled different interpretations with the same concept, the same outlines, or even according to the same model. The layout of the fortress, the vast and unusual investment in the quality of the construction and the appearance of the volute capitals indicate the abnormality of this site in the Moabite architecture world, just like Ramat Rachel is not normal in the Judahite architecture world. Also in ancient Ammon, 2 fragments of volute capitals were located in the Amman citadel, but we know nothing about the construction there. The closeness of style manifested in the Ammonite and Moabite volute capitals to the Judean capitals is clear. The finds is leading me to the assumption that the edifice at Ramat Rachel was built as an administrative and economic center under Assyrian rule. This may also be the reason for constructing the Khirbet Mudaibi in Moab and the Amman citadel in the kingdom of Ammon. And it was an Assyrian influence on the architectural elements in both vassal kingdoms, which up until then, as well as afterwards, didn't have these elements as part of the architectural repertoire. These fortresses, which do not portray local building traditions, not in quality, not in characteristics, and not in the overall layout, were probably in use by the imperial administration and maybe even held within them small forces which were positioned in strategically important points. The architecture of these structures is a one-time mixture of local and foreign, old and new characteristics. This mixture has no precedent in the local architect, and it may be seen as an additional characteristic of this unique and fundamental period of time in the history of the region at the beginning of this Pax Assyriaca in the ancient Near East. And I can see in the same time of Sargon and Sennacherib, the same architectural features appeared also in Assyria. The development, and now I can just add to this some more features, because the development of the rural area in Judah around Ramat Rachel, mainly in the Rephaim Valley, is characterized by a few more exceptional and even exciting phenomena. Around this Rephaim Valley, just below Ramat Rachel, we have a unique element called tumuli. It means artificial small hills that were created by people. It can be 20 meters high. All of them, you see it's really unique, all of them were built around a wall. You see here the wall that was built and the stone that were put inside it. All of them have kind of stairs leading up, and all of them around the valley have eye contact with Ramat Rachel, kind of symbols around this valley, around this agriculture. But to this we have a new thing, because what we have is also tunnels that were excavated around the valley in order to get to the water layer. There is no springs in this, and they wanted water. So they dug tunnels into the mountain in order to get to the layer of the water and bring the water out. Kind of artificial springs. And these artificial springs are well connected to Ramat Rachel, because when we entered, and it's only in the last few years, what we found in the entrance of them is proto-early capital. So in the entrance, we have kind of the symbol of Ramat Rachel, or the Assyrian power. You know, it's a very narrow entrance to this tunnel, so I had to go myself as well. And when you enter to this tunnel, in front of you, you have this proto-early capital. So kind of a marking of the empire of Ramat Rachel, of the power of the empire in Judah. And also in other springs like this, that again were excavated. It's not natural. Everything here is artificial. The tumuli artificial, Ramat Rachel is artificial, the spring artificial. In all of them we have small fragments of proto-Aeolic capitals, as you can see here. So again, the symbol of the empire, the symbol of the rule of the empire is very, very strong. And the tunnels are amazing, amazing. Now, beside these two things, in the last years, we have a new phenomena. So they wanted to have this garden and these royal estates in kind of Assyrian style. But if we thought that we understand the system of Assyrian rule in Judah, in the last years we understood that it's much bigger. Because in salvage excavation that was made by us in the entrance to the new American embassy that was moved by Trump in his first to Jerusalem, we found another site that is very close to Ramat Rachel, called Mordot Arnona, but with the same style. So what we found here is a site that was built with a huge tumuli, huge one, and on it was an imperial structure. And what we found in this imperial structure, exactly from the dates of King Ahaz, again, Hezekiah, the same dates as Ramat Rachel, what we found in this amazing site is hundreds of stamped jar handles. Again, the monetary system, the administrative system that was constructed in this time. A monumental building that was built above the view, just like Ramat Rachel. And all the symbols of what we understand as the Assyrian development or the Judahite development in Judah under Assyrian rule. Again, I will not go to details. I thought about it. If we'll have questions, I have some more things to show you. And if we thought that it's not enough, so in the excavations just above the city of David on what we call the Armon HaNatziv, by accident, salvage excavation, another villa was exposed from this same period with Proto-Arabic capitals. Again, the symbol of the richness of Judah during the time of probably King Menashe. And some window balustrades, again, that was not known in Judah until this time, for a window with a view of Jerusalem just below. Even in this nice villa of the rich people under Assyrian rule, they had a toilet. So outside the villa with a garden that they had a toilet that they could do what needs to be in toilets. And then we could see that even the rich people in Jerusalem at the time of Menashe had problems in the stomach with all kinds of insects and other living animal parasites that they had in their stomach, and a lot of herbs that they drank in order to control it, and a huge garden that was there, just like we had in Ramat Rachel. So you see the villa, the toilet, the garden, just above Jerusalem. So the richness in Jerusalem, this is an amazing thing that we can see in this time. The main thing is that I want to indicate is not only this, but the main thing that should be demonstrated is that all this continued in 732 BCE when Judah became Assyrian vassal kingdom, continued to the Babylonian period, but then continued also to the Persian and to the early Hellenistic period without any break, with only slow, gradual and marginal changes in the material culture from the Babylonian to the Persian. I should emphasize, without the biblical text of Ezra and Nehemiah, Haggai and Zechariah, indicating that there was a kind of return to Jerusalem, that the temple in Jerusalem was built. From the archaeological aspect, we couldn't know about any change between the Babylonian, Persian, and Hellenistic period. There are only small changes of three distinctive periods. The early Persian period, which is the time of the first return, and then the time of Ezra and Nehemiah with the classic Persian period, and then the end of the Persian, the transition to Hellenistic period, which is again not really indicative and just very slow and marginal changes in the material culture. Let me summarize what I wanted to say in this lecture and say maybe one sentence about the meaning of all this. Archaeological finds from recent years and new studies which analyze this archaeological information against the background of the history of the entire area under Assyrian rule is in isolation from the biblical description that downplayed and even denied the power of Assyrian rule and the significance of its presence in the economic and administrative development in Judah and the changes that occurred in Jerusalem and the area around it during that time period, make it possible to formulate a broad and balanced historical picture that connects the rule of the Assyrian Empire and the development in Judah at the beginning of the Age of Empires. It seems that archaeological research freed from the preconceptions, new discoveries, many of which come from accidental salvage excavations, and the combination of these with targeted excavations and a thorough analysis of a wealth of finds is an important key to a new historical understanding. With this information, it is also possible to return to the study of biblical literature with new and different questions, including the question of why the biblical writers ignored the reality that was around them and that was known to everyone who lived and visited Jerusalem during the time period when the text was written. This had great significance for the understanding of the biblical text, the time in which it was written, and the messages that the authors of this text sought to convey to their readers during that period of time when the Assyrians were no longer present in Judah and it was possible to describe the past in a way that suited the ideological messages of the authors in the era after the 100 years of Assyrian rule in Judah and before the Babylonian took over the whole area. Today's biblical archaeology is, therefore, an important tool also in the study of the biblical history and the study of the biblical text itself. And who knows what else is expected to be discovered in the coming years. Until now, the historical and biblical picture will change with a new and fascinating discoveries that are yet to come. Thank you very much.